If it's Wednesday, the legal and political world now on verdict watch. Jury deliberations are underway in Lower Manhattan as 12 men and women now decide whether or not Donald Trump will be running for president as a convicted felon. Plus, Israel says it expects the fighting in Gaza to last through the end of this year, as Secretary of State Antony Blinken implores Israel to ask itself if the incremental gains against Hamas are worth the horrific consequences. And President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris making a rare joint appearance in the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania as the campaign braces for a new phase of political warfare with Mr. Trump while trying to shore up support among black voters. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander here in Washington, and all eyes are on the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where jury deliberations are underway as we speak in Donald Trump's hush money fraud trial, the first criminal trial against a former president in American history. And the jury began its deliberations just after 11:30 Eastern time this morning. Jurors are expected to keep at it for at least another half an hour or so today before they resume tomorrow if they do not reach a verdict. At stake here, the fate of the presumptive Republican presidential nominee as he faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records tied to a series of alleged hush money payments his fixer, Michael Cohen, made to adult film star Stormy Daniels in the run-up to the 2016 election. Every check, every invoice, every ledger entry is its own felony count. Deliberations began after Judge Mershon verbally gave the jury more than an hour of deliberations, detailing what they can and cannot consider as they decide a verdict. Those instructions complex and consequential, while driving home for jurors that a conviction hinges only on unanimous agreement beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Trump used those falsified hush money business records while conspiring to commit or conceal another crime of unlawfully influencing the 2016 election. To call the jury's task complicated, that would be an understatement. And making matters more interesting here, jurors do not have access to the 55 pages of the judge's instructions, although they can ask for parts of them to be reread. Right now, Donald Trump, though, along with his lawyers, they are in a different room inside that very courthouse as we all await a potential verdict. And as deliberations began, the former president spoke to reporters, again falsely claiming the case against him here is a political witch hunt and, in his words, election interference.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess between the borders and fake elections, and you have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. He's got to do his job. And it's not for me, that I can tell you. It's a disgrace. And I mean that. Mother Teresa could not beat those charges, but we'll see. We'll see how we do.
NBC News national correspondent Yasmin Vasugian joins me from outside the courthouse in Manhattan. Also with me is former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney Jeremy Saland and former federal prosecutor Elise Adamson. I appreciate you all being with us. Let's get to you, Yasmin. You're on the ground there at the courthouse. We know the jury, just within the last hour or so, gave a note. They rang the bell, as they say, that they had some questions they wanted answered. A second note has just been delivered to the judge as well. Tell us what they've been asking to hear.
Rang the bell twice. Apologies, Peter. As you came to me, I was actually looking down at the ground, despite the fact that I'm also on the ground, because my iPad is down there, and I'm just trying to watch exactly what's happening inside the courtroom, because everyone's now in the courtroom, right? Donald Trump, the defense team, the prosecution as well, the jury inside the courtroom, because of those two bells that were rung. I got to say, we were on edge here outside the courthouse as we awaited what those notes actually read. Was there a verdict, or did they actually have questions? Well, in fact, we got that answer. There were questions, 4 questions, in fact, in that first note. 1 question in the second note. Let me talk about the second note first, and then I'll double back to the first note. The second note was they want to get the jury instructions reread to them. Judge Juan Mershon has now said to them they will reread those jury instructions, which we know now will take at least an hour and 15 minutes tomorrow morning when they resume court, because we're just about 30 minutes away from court going into recess at 4:30 p.m. This afternoon. So jury instructions will be reread tomorrow morning when court resumes. Then, when it comes to those 4 questions, it's going to take at least 30 minutes or so, the judges said, to read through those transcripts. Remember, they have a laptop with them in that deliberation room. They don't have have transcripts on that laptop. They have the evidence on that laptop that has been submitted by both the prosecution and the defense. What are they asking for? They're asking for the testimony from David Pecker when it comes to the investor meeting that he was in when he got a phone call from Donald Trump. Donald Trump asked him, and I'm paraphrasing here, Peter, because I don't want to take you through that entire transcript, about the Karen McDougal situation. Asking, for instance, David Pecker's opinion on the Karen McDougal situation. Should he, in fact, pay for Karen McDougal's story? At that point, Donald Trump voices, I don't really like paying for stories. That sort of thing always gets out, whereas David Pecker actually suggests that Donald Trump should, in fact, pay for the story to make sure it does not, in fact, get out. Another question they had with regards to Karen McDougal and buying her life rights, a conversation that was had back and forth between David Pecker. This was testimony, again, from David Pecker, along with a conversation that he had with Michael Cohen, in which Michael Cohen was very antsy about the decision they were going to make when it came to Karen McDougal and paying her $150,000. And finally, David Pecker asked Michael Cohen, how am I going to be made whole? And Michael Cohen said the boss is going to be taking care of it. David Pecker took that to mean, well, in fact, Donald Trump would be paying back David Pecker, AMI, subsequently for the $150,000 payoff. The two other things that they want from the testimony is David Pecker's testimony about the Trump Tower meeting in 2015, Michael Cohen's testimony about the Trump Tower meeting in 2015. We have talked about this meeting ad nauseum. Essentially what happened was David Pecker, Michael Cohen, Donald Trump were all in Trump Tower, in which they talked about having stories in National Enquirer that were about Donald Trump's opponents in the 2016 election, and then killing stories that were about Donald Trump that wouldn't necessarily make him look good. And then David Pecker at one point said, and I'm going to look out for stories about women, because I know, and he testified to this, that when someone runs for political office, a lot of women end up coming out of the woodwork. I would say it seems as if, and this was something that was brought up in the prosecution's closing argument, when they talked about Michael Cohen's credibility. Do not rely solely on Michael Cohen's testimony and his lack of credibility, if that's what you think he has or is lacking, right? Rely more on the evidence. Rely more on the testimony from others that you may find more credible, on the paper from others, on the evidence from others.
Yasmin,
and I'm wondering if here, in fact, they're trying to corroborate Michael Cohen's testimony with David Pecker. Sorry, Peter, that was a lot. But
no, that's
but
a lot, and it's
going
important
on.
to get to it. I just want to indulge my interruption here and just let our audience know,
now.
and you as well, because it's coming in on your iPad, as you say, on the ground. Even as you were speaking right now, we now have learned that the jurors have been dismissed for the day. That means the day one of deliberations are complete. The second day of deliberations will begin tomorrow morning. The first item of business, as evidenced by that note shared with the judge, will be a rereading of those 55 pages of juror instructions. We actually have a copy of them. They've been shared widely, but not specifically with the jurors themselves, so you can understand how that's a lot of, I dare say, gobbledygook for these individuals who are trying to juggle a lot right now, trying to get down to the very basics of what they need to resolve. Let me bring in our attorneys quickly about some of the points that we just heard there. Jeremy, let me get to you if I can. The jurors, as we heard from Yasmin here, they want to hear, and we'll just give you the wide swath here, but they want to hear parts of David Pecker's testimony, as we said, about the phone call he testified that he had with Mr. Trump during an investor meeting. That was in June of 2016, during which Mr. Trump acknowledged he knew Karen McDougal. They want to hear Pecker's testimony regarding the Trump Tower meeting. They also want to hear Michael Cohen's testimony regarding that same meeting. What are your key takeaways, and why are those requests notable?
You know, if I'm Team Trump, or more specifically Donald Trump, I'm a little anxious and nervous with this request. Why is that? Well, I think that they're looking to David Pecker, to Yasmin's point, about someone who can corroborate not Michael Cohen, but the whole story. And that does include Michael Cohen, but can tell the story and tell the narrative that, yes, Donald Trump was central to this purported conspiracy to promote an election. And we know that not because of Michael Cohen. We know that because we have David Pecker and potentially indirectly the former president's own words. So I'm concerned, if I am Team Trump, and keep in mind this, though, that not every one of those jurors may have said, I wanted to hear it. It could have been 3 of them. It could have been all of them. They could be trying to convince one person, hey, you have it wrong. But when I also hear that they want to hear Michael Cohen's description of those events at Trump Tower, you know, are they looking to try to corroborate and see if it's consistent or not, and how it's different? That could be a very good question. But overall, I'm more concerned if I'm the defense than I am the prosecution.
Yeah, Jeremy, you make an important point, right? Because if you want to hear David Pecker on this and you want to hear Michael Cohen on this, if those two are in line, then it could give the jurors a pretty good impression that Michael Cohen had corroborated statements, right? That despite him being described by the defense as the greatest liar of all time, the gloat, as they said, this could be significant here. At least let me bring you in specifically on the second note right now. That's about the jury instructions. What's striking here is that the jurors do not have a copy of the judge's instructions, 55 pages of them. The media has been provided a copy of these. Is that typical, and are these more complicated, these juror instructions? This was a lot to try to make sense of for those of us who got to reread it multiple times.
Yeah, sure. This was a lot even for me, and I'm an attorney. So this is a really old school way of doing things, not sending the written instructions back to the jury. In a lot of jurisdictions, including the District of Columbia, jurors do have copies of the instructions. I think the rationale for doing it the New York style is that way the jury is listening to the judge and how the judge has instructed them. And if they have questions, they will come, like we saw today, provide a note, and the jury and the judge will then explain it to them. However, what we've just seen is the argument for why they should have the instructions. It's not one question. They want all of the instructions again. And that's because this is a complicated
case. An hour and 15 minutes worth of reading instructions, right? If you've played a board game with your kids before, you know by the time you're flipping the page, this has already gotten perhaps too complicated than you guys are ready for. This is 55 pages worth, but you're saying that that's not unusual in a case of this kind.
No, I'm not saying it's not unusual. It is rather unusual. I'm saying this used to be the way things were done, not so now. I think it's unusual that Manhattan is still employing this, and perhaps after this trial, there'll be a good argument to start sending instructions back. The case is just simply too complicated not to let the jury read for their own. It's gonna take a long time, as we're seeing. This is taking an hour and 15 minutes out of the deliberations to go over the instructions again.
No doubt. So, Jeremy, let me ask you, if I can, about this for a second. One of the key takeaways from the judge earlier reading these instructions was that they do not need to be unanimous in their conclusion about what other alleged crime Mr. Trump may have intended to cover up. He said, although you must conclude unanimously that the defendant conspired to promote or prevent the election by unlawful means, you don't have to be unanimous in what the unlawful mean is. In determining if Mr. Trump used unlawful means to influence 2016 election, the jury may consider violations of the Federal Election Campaign Act, falsification of other business records, or violation of tax laws. Can you help make some better sense of this? Because the point was, in simplest of terms, as I understand it, they don't have to be in agreement about what law he was trying to cover up as long as they think he was doing it in an effort to cover a broken law up, correct?
Correct. So the way I can try to make it a little bit easier is change that out of this topic. Burglary is a term we all have heard of before, and burglary is basically a trespass in New York State with the intent to commit another crime. So if you're trespassing, we'll call that piece one, and the intent to commit another crime could be to sell drugs in the building. It could be to commit a sex crime. It could be to steal and commit a larceny. That next piece, you would not have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the reason why you committed that burglary is because you had the intent to steal as opposed to commit a sex crime or damage property. Taking that here, that same philosophy is you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was an intent to commit this other crime or conceal it. But what that other crime is, you do not have to prove that piece beyond a reasonable doubt. And you, the jury, can differ as to what it may be as long as that initial intent existed. This is more complicated because of the nature, but it can be used in other crimes in New York that are fairly, I wouldn't say routine or mundane, but not as sort of invoking as this.
Yeah, and this is interesting, right? Because there wasn't anybody who testified about whether there were violations of the Federal Election Campaign Act. It was all about the cover-up, so to speak, in the course of this process. Which is interesting in itself. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Let me go back to the courthouse if I can. Yasmin, to you again, we have reported now, we have been told that the jurors have been dismissed for the day. They'll begin the day tomorrow with the reading of the instructions. Donald Trump and his team had been, well, I guess just cooling their heels in a neighboring courtroom, waiting to know whether they'd be invited back in. What else has been going on in and around that courthouse as we've waited over the course of these several days, several hours for some better answers?
So you mentioned the jury has been dismissed. They're going to come back tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning to resume. Donald Trump, as you mentioned, also still inside the building because both the prosecution and the defense have to agree on which pages are actually going to be read back to the jury per what it is that they asked for until they basically find those pages first and foremost. Remember, we're looking at 6 6 weeks of a trial here, right? A lot of transcripts when it comes to some of these witnesses, especially David Pecker's testimony. By the way, the first witness called to the stand in this trial. Once they agree, once they decide what pages will actually be read back to this jury, that is when they're going to come back in the courtroom, make sure they all agree on it, and then, in fact, they'll be dismissed until tomorrow morning. So 9:30, court is back in session tomorrow morning. They will not go beyond 6 p.m. tomorrow. Remember, court usually ends around 4:30 in the afternoon. The judge says we may ask you to work late. We will not, they'll go beyond 6 p.m. Let's not forget, last night they went till about 8:30 or so p.m. to finish up closing arguments there. And the day will start with those jury instructions, an hour and 15 minutes of jury instructions, likely 30 to 45 minutes of reading back this transcript. So far, 4.5 hours of deliberation today. If we put that math together, and I do hate doing math on television, we're looking at not resuming deliberations tomorrow until after all is read, starting at 9:30 in the morning until about 11 or 12 in the afternoon, Peter.
Elise, first of all, Yasmin, thank you to you. Elise, I want to follow up on some of the points that Yasmin was making for us there right now. So let's go 35,000 feet for a second here. What are the key moments, the key decisions that these jurors have to make? What are the crucial moments in the testimony we've seen over the course of the last several weeks that you think are going to be critical to the decisions being made here?
Well, I mean, it's really going to go to what the former president's intent was, right? The question is, and I think they're grappling with it right now with these early meetings with Pecker, was the former president even aware this was going on? Was he part of this scheme for the catch and kill of these stories? And why is that important? It's important because we're talking about that other offense. He entered into this agreement with Cohen and Pecker to catch and kill these stories to benefit his election. He did not want them out, and he did not want them harming his campaign. That is his motive. That is the intent. And that is what the jury really needs to decide. And they don't want to decide it just on Cohen's testimony, and they can't. They were instructed that as an accomplice, you cannot find beyond a reasonable doubt by Michael Cohen's words alone. It needs to be corroborated. And I think that's another reason that they're asking for readback for Pecker's testimony, because he is going to be corroborative of everything that Michael Cohen, especially with respect to this meeting, which is so key. I also want to point out something that is significant. The jury seems to be going in the same chronological order that the prosecution did their closing. We are only in August of 2015 here. That is the Pecker meeting. So it looks like the jury is kind of following this tour guide invitation by the prosecutor, and they're starting with this meeting. But this after the Weisselberg meeting, I would say, is the most significant.
Jeremy, last thought to you quickly here, which is the effort by the prosecutors in their closing arguments was basically to say, hey, we didn't pick this guy as our key witness, as our star witness in Michael Cohen. It is the defendant who picked him, and that's what we have to deal with. If this is a guy that you view as a liar, he's a liar because Donald Trump hired a liar. Is that enough? And is Michael Cohen's fate just intertwined with Donald Trump's? Is their belief of Michael Cohen critical to the decisions they make here?
Well, the prosecution tried to make the point that he didn't have to be only on Michael Cohen. But I think most importantly, to your point you said moments ago, Michael Cohen was not chosen by the prosecution, just like Henry Hill and Sammy the Bull were not chosen by their respective mob flip to testify against the bigger bad guys. You surround yourself with certain people, and you don't surround yourself with people who are in the Boy Scouts when you're committing purported crimes. I think they did a terrific job of corroborating him, and Elise has just pointed out the evidence that they're asking for now is not Michael Cohen directly, it's indirectly Michael Cohen, and it corroborates him. They're doing a good job, and I think these questions show that.
Well, as is always the case, we sit and we wait, and it turns out we'll be waiting at least through a first night until tomorrow to try to get some more answers and perhaps even a verdict. Yasmin Vasugian, Jeremy Saland, Elise Adamson, appreciate all of you. Thanks for getting with us to start your day on this critical day for us. And coming up, the former president and his allies try to capitalize politically on the legal complexity of this case and to try to sow confusion about what could be happening inside that jury room. Our panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As the jury deliberates his fate, Donald Trump is lashing out about the jury instructions in his New York hush money case, taking to social media, falsely claiming the judge is not requiring a unanimous decision on the charges. To be clear, all criminal convictions by a jury require a unanimous decision. As we have noted, though, the jury instructions from Judge Marchand do note some complex questions that jurors do not have to decide unanimously. To find Trump guilty, they have to unanimously agree that his falsification of business records was part of an attempt to commit or conceal another crime. What the jury does not have to unanimously agree to here is what the elements of that other crime were. So Mr. Trump's post is at best a gross misrepresentation of the jury's instructions. But already his congressional allies, including 2 potential vice presidential candidates, are seizing on this detail as proof that the trial is political. And joining me now is our panel. Nicholas Wu, the congressional reporter for Politico, Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, and Matt Gorman, Republican strategist and former advisor to the Tim Scott presidential campaign. Nick, let's start with you if we can. This is clearly not the first, certainly won't be the last time that Donald Trump has made a false claim as it relates to this trial. Have we reached the point, though, where it almost doesn't matter the conclusion here, that Donald Trump has diluted things enough, at least for enough people, where the final results from the judge and the jury will not matter?
We've certainly seen Trump and his allies try to muddy the waters a lot around this trial. And the interesting thing for me as a Hill watcher is to see those tweets from his allies who, in some ways, have started to use this trial as a litmus test for their loyalty to the former president. Those 2 senators, Scott Rubio and Cotton, are both reportedly under consideration for Trump's vice presidential pick. And so we see them getting out in front of others to defend the former president.
So let me ask you, Megan, about this a little bit. Does this sort of render moot whatever strategy the Biden folks had at this point, right? Like, we'll talk about what happened yesterday in a moment. But going forward, there's been a lot of reporting, including from those of us first at NBC, about the strategy about what they're going to do after this to try to better make clear to the audience what happened here, to Americans what happened here. Not to politicize it per se, but as the reporting is, that he says, hey, accept the outcome. What does the White House, or the campaign, I should say, have to do with whatever we witness happen here?
I think they just need to move forward and keep drawing the contrast between what President Biden stands for and what former President Trump stands for. I think that there's a lot of really good messaging there. There's a lot of really good anecdotes of what the difference between the two. But I do think we need to this needs to end. We need to move forward and get into the campaign season.
So you say it needs to end, they need to get into the campaign season. But one of the real challenges, as you know well, is that the White House feels like Americans. That's why they wanted to move the debate up for one reason, right? Because they want to show that contrast between these 2 characters, not just characters politically, but between the character of each of these individuals. Doesn't this speak specifically to the issue of character? Isn't this something that they would want to sort of amplify?
Sure, absolutely. But I also think that Trump needs to be out on the campaign trail talking about what he's going to do, to what his plan is and what he wants to do for the next 4 years. And the more he does that, the more contrast people see between him and President Biden. People already know their character, like their actual character. People already know the difference there. But they need to see the difference in their policies, and that you need President Trump on the campaign trail to do that.
Let me ask him out again to get back to where we started here, which is about the sort of representation that we've seen from the former president and some from his allies. What is the line between sort of political posturing and spin here and willful misrepresentation? They're using this, the fact that the judge said you don't have to unanimously agree on what the crime was that he was trying to cover up, in effect, that was evidence that this is a sham trial. That doesn't make this a sham trial, as every legal expert will tell you at this point.
Well, there's 2 different audiences here, right? There's the legal audience where, look, I don't have a law degree, so I'm not going to pretend to explain it to you. But there's also the political audience, right? Like, even though, you look at polling, NBC's polling, you look at focus groups I've seen on other networks, no matter what happens to this trial, it's not swaying from folks, by and large, from one camp to the other. However, you're going to message it as best you can to turn out, at the very least, their respective bases. We saw that with the De Niro, quasi-press conference yesterday. We'll see that with the tweets today. And I think, too, whether you mention the debates, I think the De Niro press conference is kind of another example of this. We're starting to see now tactics that show at least the Biden campaign's acknowledging that they're not where they want to be. They need some momentum. They need to be a little bit scrappy. I think what we saw yesterday is another example of that.
You say that because the debates have now been moved up at their effort, right, in June, and because Robert De Niro showed up yesterday and they sort of tried to spin things a bit as best they could to get some ammunition out of it.
They realize they need to change the game a little bit if they're on a glide path to just being the same way, down 5 points or so like they were.
So what was striking, I want to get to De Niro again in a moment, but Nick, let me just follow up again on this first thought, right, which is about the idea that you have these advocates, these allies of the former president. You got Marco Rubio, you got Tim Cotton, both on the short, or who knows how short list that right now exists for VP. But there's not always a reward for those who stand up and sort of spew the former president's talking points here. Take the representative from this state, or from not this state, the neighboring state of Virginia, Representative Bob Good, who showed up with the proud red tie like the man he was speaking on behalf of, Donald Trump, just a couple of days ago. Take a listen.
So we're here to have his back, we're here to defend him, and to tell the truth about this travesty of justice, this political persecution, this election interference, this rigging of elections. We are President Trump's voice. We have his back. He will ultimately be proven innocent.
So this was Bob Good just a couple of weeks ago, and just today, Donald Trump endorsed Bob Good's opponent. We should note Bob Good in the past had said he would support Ron DeSantis in the primary here. Donald Trump, you were talking about fealty and devotion. This is a pretty clear message. Hey, you can try to come crawling back, but it's not good enough for me.
Yeah, as we see with Mr. Good, loyalty only goes so far. And the interesting thing about him going there was that his primary challenger, McGuire, was there at the same time as him at the trial. So we see Republicans converging on this trial as part of it, with all the attention and all of the cameras that are around there, as a way of not only trying to show their own loyalty to the president, but also to play up their own political credentials. And I think Mr. Good's race is a good example of that.
So let me ask you again, Megan. I want to get to now the Robert De Niro topic, right? I didn't want to look backward yet, but now let's look back, because it says a little bit about what we may see going forward. I spoke to several senior campaign aides today who said, among other things, that this was an effort to try to not just win those political news watchers, but to try to get on other means of news consumers' plates, right? Those who may get their news through entertainment TV. Robert De Niro gets on Entertainment Tonight and on Access Hollywood, so to speak. Gets on TMZ and in places here. But what was striking is they have been so sort of steadfast in their effort not to engage in any form that yesterday the argument is they made that they needed to try to break through the noise with someone they viewed as credible, like Robert De Niro was a critical sort of tactic. Not the only tactic they'll use, but a tactic. But what does that say to you? To me, it was kind of striking because it did come out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think this has been months and months of, or I guess weeks and weeks of listening to Trump just over and over dominate all of the news cycles. I think this is a good way for them to try to break through and to get into the narrative. They're also trying to reach voters where they are, just like in the other publications. I mean, it was a little odd, but
let me interrupt. If Donald Trump is only doing harm to himself, they wouldn't feel a need to break through here, right? So is this an acknowledgement that Donald Trump may not be seeing the damage to their opponent this fall that they were hoping to see at this point in this trial?
I think that they're just building their own narrative up, and I think that they're just laying groundwork for moving into the debates and building momentum here. I think that the news is covering the Trump trial nonstop, wall to wall, and I think that they're just trying to get some more of their messaging into the news.
Matt, can I pull back the curtain a bit as we talk Veep stakes a little bit? We talked about Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton. You know very well Tim Scott, a guy that you traveled all over the place with when he was running for president before he dropped out. Now he stands behind Donald Trump in a lot of the photo ops, including some that he does in the courtroom at the courthouse right now. As you hear from the people that you talk to in your community of friends and allies, is Tim Scott a front runner in this list? Who do you think the buzz is about when we talk about VP states?
Look, I don't have much inside information, but I'll say, look, I think someone certainly him and the former president are close. And I think, too, if the Trump campaign wants to have that continued outreach to minority voters, specifically African-American men, which I think are going to be very, very crucial as we go forward, Tim Scott will be someone who could absolutely appeal to those folks and talk about his story. I absolutely think so.
And, Nick, as we talk about those folks you're trying to appeal to right now, it's the black voter that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris today are trying to appeal to, not just today. We saw Joe Biden with, I think, 4 separate days just a couple of weeks ago, speaking specifically to black voters, spoke at Morehouse College, among other events. How concerned is the White House and the White House's allies, the president's allies, about not just shoring up black support, but making sure that they have the black support and the numbers they need? He has won it dramatically in the past. Donald Trump only got 8%, I think, several years ago. This time around, he's polling much better than that.
Well, the Hill Democrats I've talked to certainly have expressed some concerns and some jitters about what polling seems to show is a drift among black voters, and black men in particular, towards Republicans and away from Biden. Now, whether this is due to broader concerns about the economy or the memories of the civil rights movement waning remains to be seen. But for Democrats, we're certainly seeing these efforts to shore up support and to show that they're not trying to take black votes for granted, since this constituency has been such a key part of the Democratic Party for so many years.
The bottom line, it doesn't matter why these black, in particular male voters, may not be as interested in Joe Biden right now. We've done a lot of testing in the field, spoken to these individuals in different places where they live, and they say right now, yeah, I'm open to voting for Joe Biden, but tell me why I should vote for Joe Biden, right? There's still a lot of information, a lot of work that the White House, that the president needs to do, isn't there?
That's for sure, and that's why we're seeing the White House and Democrats try to play up this contrast early between their side and Trump. Biden, on a stop today, I believe, was talking about the difference, how he would have handled January 6th, how Trump would have handled January 6th if the rioters were black.
Well, we got a long way to go, so it's obviously one of many demographics that all sides are going to be trying to engage with. Nick Wu, nice to see you. Matt Gorman, Megan Hayes, always a pleasure to have you here. And up next, the Biden campaign gets ready to retool its fight against Donald Trump post-trial as President Biden and Vice President Harris, as we just noted, hit the trail together. We're going to talk to a co-chair of the Biden campaign. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris made a rare joint appearance on the campaign trail this afternoon, courting black voters in Pennsylvania, a crucial constituency in a key battleground state. Today was the official launch of what the campaign is calling Black Voters for Biden-Harris, and included top surrogates like Maryland Governor Wes Moore, along with visits to black-owned businesses. At an event at a majority black school, Mr. Biden spoke about his administration's record with black Americans and accused Mr. Trump of pandering for their support.
Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You got it, kid. You got it. I'm showing you who I am, and Trump has shown you who he is. And today, Donald Trump is pandering and peddling lies and stereotypes for your vote so he can win for himself, not for you. Well, Donald Trump will have a message for you. Not in our house and not in our watch.
Today's events were the latest in a series this month geared toward galvanizing black voters, as polls show Mr. Biden's level of support below what it was in 2020. And joining me now is Delaware Democratic Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. She is a national co-chair for the Biden-Harris campaign and is running for a Senate seat in Delaware. Congresswoman, we very much appreciate your being with us. The president and the vice president, as we just shared, are in Philadelphia today. They're courting black voters. They also held events geared at black voters earlier this month. They were in Georgia and in Michigan. Is this enhanced level of outreach and acknowledgement that President Biden standing with black voters is not what it once was or what it needs to be?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. As you know, this is my second time as a national co-chair. And so for me, as someone who has known Joe Biden for most of my life, I can tell you that this campaign, this person takes the black vote seriously, and it has been at the heart of his career. I mean, even in Delaware, Joe Biden will tell you that truly it has been the black vote that made him senator, vice president, and also president. And so we're not taking one vote for granted. We're going to make sure that people, as the president said, when someone shows you who they are, the Maya Angelou quote, believe them the first time. Well, we can see the difference between a Joe Biden and a Donald Trump. And I know personally because I've served under both presidents. Right. And I know there's a big difference, particularly for black folks.
So, Congresswoman, let me ask you specifically then. I think the question is, if the campaign was in such good shape with black voters, as President Biden has done in the past so many times, why would it be using its most valuable resource, the president, to hold so many events, 5 events targeting black voters in May of an election year?
You know, I think part of it is to show that we see how important that vote is. A lot of times people feel like their vote doesn't matter. A lot of people are going through a lot of struggles right now coming out of the pandemic, and they are not even aware of the things that this administration has done to really uplift our communities.
So is that evidence of why we're seeing some, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that evidence of why we are seeing some of the erosion right now, the need to sort of better communicate that so they can bring those black voters back?
You know, again, I think a lot of people have their own pains and things that they're dealing with. And so we want to make sure that we highlight the different investments that he has made, whether it is in our infrastructure and creating jobs, the lowest black unemployment rate in 50 years and probably ever for us, investments in our black small businesses, which is why he was visiting small businesses today. When you look at the investment in education, the $16 billion for HBCUs, and also student debt relief, which is one of the top issues that I hear about from black voters. I had a Capitol police officer stop me on my way into the Capitol, asked me to roll down my window, and he said, "My wife is a school teacher. She's been working for decades. We were able to get that debt relief, and it's the first time that we've been able to get out from under, and I feel like I hit the lottery. I want you to tell Joe thank you." Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that people see and hear those stories,
right?
And we're making those investments now because it is a priority
and as you
for
know,
this community as well.
I was just going to say, as you know well, the issue of
see
student debt forgiveness right now is obviously one that benefits some Democrats, some Republicans, and other independents have had their own complaints saying it's unfair to support one community who went to college and not to support another. These are challenging decisions for the White House right now. I do want to put up some of the key numbers, though, from our NBC poll. Compared to 2020, the number of black voters and young voters who say they are very interested in the election is sharply down. Those were two key groups for the president. So I know the efforts that you're making right now to spark support, but to this point, has the White House not done a good enough job of communicating this message to the black community? We had a lot of the folks we spoke to out there right now who talk often in the black community about how high prices are, not exclusively inflation, but just how expensive things have become.
Yeah, one of the number one issues that we hear about and that this administration is working on is lowering the cost of things. Everything from making sure that insulin prices are cut and capped at $35 for those on Medicare to, again, dealing with issues such as student debt and access to capital. But I think the reality is, like I said, folks are living in their own world right now, and they are, we're trying to make sure that we let them know we see you, and that's why this administration has put so much effort in, and that we're going to make sure that you get the message that works for you. Not the same message doesn't work for everyone. And if you just did a split screen of the two presidents just today, one is in court, one has, extremists following him to the courthouse, and then you have Joe Biden, who is actually out in communities, out talking to voters, seeing what their needs are as we finish the job, but also sharing those incredible things that have happened. I mean, he's done more in one administration than some presidents do in two, and it is a lot to communicate. So we're trying to make sure we meet people where they are.
I hate to keep interrupting you. There's so many questions I want to be asking you, so thanks for your time and speaking to me. I do want to ask you about the Middle East, if I can, for a moment. The Israeli National Security Advisor just said that the war there will last through the end of the year. Is this situation politically sustainable for President Biden? What does he need to be doing differently?
Yeah. First of all, the president, like myself and so many others, want to see peace in that region. It is why he has been calling for the hostages to be released. It is why he has been calling for there to be humanitarian aid, and it is why he's been calling for a two-state solution.
But it hasn't worked so far, so what should he do differently?
Actually, I'm going to push back on you and say that this administration has been working very hard to make sure that we get to peace. But your question was about voters and will it impact us at the polls? And the reason why it's really important for us to make sure that people understand the choice, I'd rather have a Joe Biden negotiating a peace than the former president in court. I'd rather have somebody who has fought for reproductive freedom, because the people most at risk from a Donald Trump election are young people and people of color. Taking away our planet, taking away our reproductive freedoms, and also not supporting us in jobs and the economy. So I think the choice is going to be very clear to people. The choice is very clear. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are working for everyone as opposed to Donald Trump, who's concerned about himself and a small group of people.
Let me ask you specifically about that topic, reproductive rights. The Biden campaign put out a statement just today hitting a reported Trump plan that would remove requirements that insurance cover forms of contraception. Is the Biden campaign laying out the stakes of a Trump presidency well enough? This has obviously been a very determinative issue in a series of states, including some red states in the early primaries that we have seen right here. Does the White House need to do more to make this issue clear to a wide swath of American voters?
Well, first of all, we've got a former president who has bragged about wanting to ban abortion. He has bragged about actually the Dobbs decision and who he put in. And now he's talking about contraception. He's talking about IVF. I literally became a grandmother this past year for the first time. And had it not been for IVF, my granddaughter wouldn't be here. So this administration, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, have been real fighters for this. But you're seeing across the country that it's an issue that brings together young people. It brings together Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And it's going to be on the ballot. It is going to be one of the determining factors in who wins this election. You got somebody who is focused on our reproductive freedom and somebody who's trying to take, for the first time, we've actually had a constitutional right taken from us. That Donald Trump owns it. He owns it. And so we're not going to let him forget it either on the campaign trail.
Congresswoman, and we should say Grandma Lisa Blunt Rochester, we appreciate you making time and speaking to us. Thank you so much. After this break, the head of Israel's National Security Council now says Israel is expecting 7 more months of fighting, at least in Gaza, despite mounting backlash and international pressure to end the offensive. We have the very latest in this war next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Amid growing concerns over the trajectory of the war, Israel appears to be signaling it will not slow down its offensive in Gaza, putting increased pressure on President Biden when it comes to enforcing his red line. The White House maintains that the strike that killed dozens of Palestinian civilians in Rafah will not result in a change in U.S. policy, and that it has not yet seen Israel launch a major operation. But the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, acknowledged today that even targeted strikes by Israel could still result in unspeakable tragedy.
We also see that even limited, focused, targeted attacks designed to deal with terrorists who've killed innocent civilians and are plotting to kill more, even those kind of operations can have terrible, horrific, unintended consequences.
Secretary Blinken went on to say Israel must ask itself whether those incremental gains against Hamas are worth the unintended consequences and costs for civilians. Israel, meantime, appears to be forging ahead with Israeli Defense Forces tanks seen in Rafah's city center, and a top Israeli official saying the war there will go on for months. NBC's international correspondent Rafah Sanchez filed this report for us from Tel Aviv.
Hey there, with Israel stepping up its offensive in Rafah and the number of Palestinian civilians killed growing by the day, the White House is facing new questions about where exactly is President Biden's red line, and has Israel crossed it? Now, the line from John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, is that President Biden does not want to see a large-scale Israeli ground offensive involving lots of units, involving the levels of destruction that we saw in northern Gaza. And the White House believes that at this point, we have not seen that happen. But earlier today, a senior Israeli official saying Israel believes this war will continue at least until the end of the year. And that likely means that there will be more bloody days like what we saw on Sunday night when an Israeli airstrike igniting a firestorm in a camp for displaced people, killing at least 45. Many of them are women and children, according to the emergency services in Hamas-run Gaza. Now, the IDF releasing what it says is the initial investigation into that strike. They say they used 2 small bombs to target Hamas leaders meeting at a structure inside of that camp. But they say there was some kind of secondary explosion which caused that firestorm. They are saying the weapons they used were too small to have caused that fire itself. They are suggesting Possibly there were Hamas weapons hidden inside the camp which caused that secondary blast. They haven't provided any evidence of that. An Israeli official also suggested to NBC News it's possible that a gas tank ignited. The Pentagon is also confirming a report we did earlier that the U.S. military has been forced to suspend the delivery of aid into Gaza by sea after that temporary pier off the coast of Gaza was damaged in bad weather. That is a major blow to the humanitarian effort at a time when the Rafah crossing, the main lifeline for food and aid into Gaza, remains closed. Now, an Israeli official tells NBC News that Israel has drawn up a new ceasefire proposal and has presented that to the American and the Qatari mediators. But at this point, Hamas says they haven't seen that proposal, and there is no indication right now that these talks, stalled for so long, are going to lead to significant progress. Back to you.
Raf Sanchez on the ground for us in Tel Aviv. Raf, thank you. And we want to bring in Richard Haass, the president emeritus at the Council on Foreign Relations. Richard, President Biden said that a major ground operation in Rafah was, in effect, a red line. I want to play for you what we heard from John Kirby of the National Security Council yesterday at the White House following the death of those dozens of Palestinians in southern Gaza within recent days. Listen.
A major ground operation is, thousands and thousands of troops moving in a maneuvered, concentrated, coordinated way against a variety of targets on the ground. The kinds of things we've seen, we've done ourselves. That's what we're talking about here.
So the White House trying to be very specific about what a major operation looks like. This is a fine line because crossing a red line would require a change in U.S. policy by the president's own words. So is the White House moving that red line right now?
The problem with the red line is it's simply too legalistic and narrow. I understand the opposition to a large-scale Israeli military operation in Rafah that would inevitably cause large numbers of civilian casualties. The real question for the White House is whether that's a sufficient policy, and I would suggest not. As we've just seen, even more targeted policies by Israel can lead to large numbers of civilian deaths. And again, there's no reason to believe that the further degrading of Hamas will bring about stability in Gaza if the Israelis continue to refuse to introduce a political dimension here. One has to have a comprehensive policy that is both a military and a political approach, and the Israeli government refuses to do that. So at some point, the administration has to ask itself, does it support, for example, a resolution in the United Nations calling for a ceasefire? Maybe in exchange for hostages, which people aren't talking about anymore. But I don't think it's enough to say we simply oppose a large-scale military operation. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
And Richard, I think as compelling as anything that we've heard over the course of this was that after all the pressure that we've heard from the White House, from Jake Sullivan, from whomever, Israel, its national security spokesperson or national security advisor said that the war will continue through the end of this year. It is not yet June. What does that say about Israel's strategy here, its effectiveness, and the White House's ability, the president's perhaps inability to influence it?
Well, it's clear Israel continues to reject American entreaties. A lot, though, will depend upon how the Israelis define the word war. Let me give you one extreme. The Israelis do something very, very slow, careful, very modest, just going after the Hamas leaders when they get really good intelligence. That's one thing. At the other end of the spectrum is they do something big with tanks and aircraft and so forth. So I think we have to see the idea that there could be open-ended, low-level targeted military operations against Hamas leaders doesn't surprise me. I think that's probably inevitable. The real question, though, is the scale of what Israel does. Again, whether they introduce some political dimension to their policy, whether they are working with Arab countries and the Palestinian Authority to provide an alternative in Gaza to either Hamas or Israeli occupation. That's what I'd be focusing on if I were the White House.
Israel submitted a new proposal, we heard today, to the U.S. and to Qatari officials for what they described as a sustained calm, not a formal ceasefire or an extended, a permanent ceasefire. Are we moving in the right direction here?
My guess is we will get there. You'll see a few more weeks of fairly intense military operations. My guess is sometime next month, you'll see the dial go considerably down, and you'll see the end to what I would describe as major military operations. But Israel can't agree to a total ceasefire if, for example, 3 weeks from now or 3 months from now, they got really good intelligence about where this or that leader of Hamas is. They can't be expected not to act. So I think there's not going to be a total blanket or prohibition on military operations, but it's got to be dialed significantly down militarily, and it's got to be dialed significantly up diplomatically. And we'll see if that happens, and that's what we should be pressing for.
Richard Haass, how much of this is a political calculation by Benjamin Netanyahu, knowing there's an election on the horizon here in the U.S.?
Look, people have multiple motives here. It could be to extend his own situation. It could be to play for an alternative leadership here in the United States. He's clearly put the pursuit of the war ahead of anything to do with hostages, and he's got a coalition government that simply refuses to introduce a serious diplomatic initiative here. That's the big problem, Peter.
Yeah, Richard Haass, I appreciate your expertise. Thank you for being with us to share all that you know about that region. And still to come right here, Supreme Court controversy. Justice Samuel Alito now rejecting calls for him to recuse himself from cases involving the January 6th riot and the former president. New reporting is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. After facing backlash over reports that he flew controversial flags at his home, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito is rejecting calls to recuse himself from cases involving former President Trump and the January 6th attack on the Capitol. In a letter to Congress, Alito once again blamed his wife for flying those flags, including a flag with links to Christian nationalism at their homes in Northern Virginia and on the Jersey Shore, saying that therefore he was, quote, duty-bound to reject the recusal request. Donald Trump was quick to applaud Alito's decision. In a post on his Truth Social account, the former president congratulated Alito for showing, quote, intelligence, courage, and guts. And joining me now on set is NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley here. Donald Trump saying it's effectively courageous to say it was your wife who did it and not you, but really it's the recusal that Donald Trump was most satisfied by there, as he would be a key conservative vote for him on any of these cases. What do you make of this moment, and how should we watch this thing playing out further?
Yeah, I don't think there was ever really a question that he was going to reject calls for his recusal. So he can dress it up in this language, duty bound and what have you. But yeah, I mean, he's effectively investigating himself and deciding that he did absolutely nothing wrong and everything was above board. So it was kind of a foreseen outcome that he would reject these calls. But I mean, it does, I think, with the public, raise a lot of questions. The idea that in January of 2021, days after the U.S. Capitol was attacked, you're flying an upside-down flag on your property and then just claiming, I have no role in this whatsoever, and I can't do anything with the fact that my wife is flying this flag otherwise.
To be clear, she said that it was there as a signal of distress because of an argument with a neighbor here. But in that climate where America, and turn back the clock to that day, you remember where Americans were at that time, and that flag was carried by plenty of rioters there on the Hill.
Yeah, as well as the Appeal to Heaven flag, which flew at their vacation home, which Justice Alito said he wasn't aware of the connection to the January 6th there, said that people can have the flag for historic purposes, even if new groups have repurposed it in the years since.
So first, I want to get a sense of what Democrats are saying about this. And the reason this matters, right, is because the Supreme Court answers to nobody here. They can, we can talk about ethics all we want, talk about Justice Clarence Thomas as well here. But at the end of the day, the court does as it pleases.
Yeah, and I mean, the court really is like this public trust, right? So as much as you can have discussions about this, because they don't really have those strict rules that they've decided to do on their own, it is really a matter of public perception. The Supreme Court really only has power because the people give it power. So public confidence is really important in these matters, especially when you're talking about a president like Trump, because especially with the executive branch, that's really what this all boils down to, is the public confidence in the court, which is why that's so important. I have to maintain that.
As has been said before, their robes are black. They are not red or blue, and Americans would be better served, perhaps, if we were able to watch them in that same lens as well, right? But it's a lot more challenging these days. Ryan Riley, thank you. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.